picture replaced by a cheerful-looking weather forecaster, but it continued to be the child's voice they heard. Mr. Benedict signaled number 2, whose fingers flew over the computer keyboard. The child's voice faded. The weather forecaster was promising clear skies by afternoon. Mr. Benedict switched off the television. On the blank television screen, the children could suddenly see their reflections. Every one of them was frowning. When they realized this, all their faces adopted looks of surprise, then of intense curiosity.
"What does obfuscate mean?" asked Constance.
Sticky, as if someone had pulled a string in his back, promptly answered,
"To make so confused or opaque as to be difficult to perceive or to otherwise render indistinct."
Constance looked frightened. "It means to make things muddled," Rainey said. "Thank you for the dictionary definition, Sticky," said Mr. Benedict, "and thank you, Rainey, for the translation." He crossed his arms and regarded the children. "This child's voice is currently being transmitted on every television, radio, and cell phone in the world, which means, of course, it's being absorbed by millions of minds. And yet, although in an important part of every mind, this child's messages are being heard, understood, and taken seriously, in another part, the part that is aware of itself, the messages remain undetected. But this receiver I've invented is capable of detecting and translating them, much as Rainey translated Sticky's definition a moment ago."
"But how could people who speak different languages understand that kid?" Kate asked. "What about people in Spain?"
"The messages transmit in every language. I've tuned the receiver to English only because that's what we all speak."
"This is too creepy," Sticky said, glancing nervously behind him. It's like...
"Like having a strange person whisper in your ear while you sleep," Mr. Benedict suggested.
"Okay, that just made it creepier," Sticky said.
Rainey was shaking his head wonderingly. "How is this happening, Mr. Benedict? These messages, whatever they are, how are they being sent?" "To put it simply," Mr. Benedict began, "they depend for their mobility upon external agents."
"Mr. Benedict, that's hardly putting it simply,"
interrupted Rhonda with a significant look at Constance, whose face had darkened with frustration. "Forgive me, you're quite right. Simply put, the messages ride piggyback on signals. Television, radio, cell phones, all these things make use of invisible signals, and the sender has found a way to take advantage. The messages aren't picky. They will ride on any kind of signal. The sender has discovered how to control the adhesive property of thoughts."
"The what?"
asked the children altogether. "The adhesive property of thoughts. That is, the way thoughts are drawn to signals and then stick to them, much as little pieces of metal may be drawn to a magnet. They're attracted to all kinds of signals, even other thoughts."
"So the messages are just thoughts?"
Kate said. "Indeed," Mr. Benedict replied, "although I wouldn't say just. Thoughts carry a great deal of freight." "But why does the sender use children to send them?" Rainey asked. "A devilish trick," Mr. Benedict said, "and a necessary one. You see, only a child's thoughts can be slipped into the mind so secretly. For some reason, they go unnoticed."
"No surprise there," Constance humped. "I've never met a grown-up who believed me capable of thought." "She's absolutely right," put in number 2 with a sharp edge in her voice. "People pay no attention to what children say, much less to what they think."
Rhonda patted number 2's shoulder. "Number 2 is a bit testy about this. She was often ignored as a child."
"That doesn't change the truth,"
number 2 snarled. "Easy now," said Rhonda. "Only teasing."
"Sorry, blood sugar's low," said number 2, hastily unwrapping a granola bar.
"At any rate," Mr. Benedict continued, "I believe the sender uses children as a sort of filter. After passing through the minds of children, the messages become virtually undetectable. Where adult thoughts would lumber into the mind like an elephant, children's creep in on cat feet and find shadowy place to hide."
"Nobody notices them at all?"
Sticky asked. "Oh, some may be vaguely aware of mental activity," Mr. Benedict said, "but if so, they attribute the uneasy sensation to something else. They think perhaps they've had an original idea or have drunk too much coffee."
"I don't recall ever having felt that way," said Constance. "Like something happening, but I don't know what."
The others shook their heads, indicating they hadn't either. That's because you love the truth, said Mr. Benedict. You see, number 2 interrupted it.
Mr. Benedict, before you go on, won't you take a seat? Makes me so nervous you standing there like that. Too many hard things just about. Just look at this chair and the desk and the television cabinet and all these tools.
Turning this way and that, number 2 was pointing at almost everything she saw. Fine, fine, number 2. We'll all sit, said Mr. Benedict, settling in a cross-legged position on the floor. He gestured to the others to join him. Shoving aside books, papers, and old pieces of machinery, the children made room to sit. Number 2 took a deep breath to calm herself. You see, Mr. Benedict began again, although most people care about the truth, they can nonetheless, under certain circumstances and given proper persuasion, be diverted from it. Some, however, possess an unusually powerful love of truth, and you children are among the few. Your minds have been resisting the hidden messages. Is that why your test asked whether we like television and radio? Asked Rainey. Mr. Benedict tapped his nose. Exactly. Of course, it's possible you enjoy watching an occasional TV show or listening to the radio every now and then, but in general you find you don't like it. This is because your minds, so unwilling to be deceived, are avoiding exposure to the messages.
I don't see what's dangerous about all this, Constance said with a sour expression. So people are receiving some kid's thoughts and don't realize it. That hardly seems reason to panic.
We haven't yet come to the panic part, replied Mr. Benedict gravely.
Oh,
said Constance.
Great,
said Sticky. Something is approaching, Mr. Benedict said. Something dreadful. These messages are connected to it, but they are only the beginning. What's coming is worse, far worse. A looming darkness like storm clouds, sweeping in to cover the sky.
What?
Sticky stammered.
What is it?
Mr. Benedict scratched his rumpled head. I'm afraid I don't know. The children blinked. Was he joking? He didn't know? Ah, I sense your confusion, said Mr. Benedict. I should have said, I don't exactly know. Rhonda spoke up. We have good reason to believe in this coming threat, children. It's just that...
But if you have good reason, Constance interrupted, why are you just sitting around? Call the government. Alert the authorities.
An excellent point, Constance, said Mr. Benedict, who, it seemed to Rainey, was surprisingly tolerant of the girl's rudeness. In fact, I was once a trusted adviser to certain high officials, many of whom presided over government agencies. But things have changed. Not only have those agencies been dismantled and a number of good men and women gone missing, but officials formerly attentive to my remarks have grown skeptical of them. They have come to look upon me as a friendly kook, and some even regard me with suspicion. Everything I do now, I do in secret. Did you just say good men and women gone missing? Said Rainey, hoping he had misunderstood. Vanished, said Mr. Benedict grimly. Years ago, when it first came to my attention that some operatives had disappeared, I naturally inquired about them. But my questions, no matter to whom I put them, and I put them to many people, were met with an astonishing lack of regard. It was perfectly silly, I was told, to be asking such questions. Somehow it was believed that these missing agents chose to go away, were given plum assignments in sunny climates, perhaps, or else had gone into early retirement, although there was no evidence of any such thing. No one seemed to care where the guests had gone, but everyone knew. So I was told again and again, everyone knew the agents hadn't gone missing. No, the very idea was preposterous. The children were dumbstruck. Government agents had disappeared and nobody cared. Nobody even believed it. Rainey found his voice first. So that's how you know these strange messages are having an effect on people. Mr. Benedict nodded. Quite right, Rainey. At least it's one example.
Wait a minute, Kate said. How do you know the messages have anything to do with that?
Because of that phrase we heard on the wrong voice, class. Because of the phrase we heard on the receiver, said Rainey. The missing aren't missing, they're only departed. Don't you think there's a connection?
Hey, you're right, said Kate, who had already forgotten that phrase.
Constance seemed exasperated.
Okay, so the authorities are being snookered by these hidden messages, but how could They resist the facts. Show them your receiver, Gizmo, Mr. Benedict. They'll have to believe you.
I'm afraid they won't, said Mr. Benedict. The receiver would be considered insufficient evidence. For all they know, the messages might be of my own invention, generated by the receiver itself. I'm no longer considered a trustworthy source of information. Rainey was puzzled. But, Mr. Benedict, if you explained how it works, scientifically, I mean, how could they not believe you? Surely you can demonstrate the principles involved. Mr. Benedict hesitated. A reasonable suggestion, Rainey. Now let me see. How to put it? I can't exactly... Well, Number 2 interrupted him.
What Mr. Benedict is too embarrassed to say, children, is that even if he did explain it, no one would believe him because no one would understand him. That's the downside of being a genius. Just because you understand something doesn't mean anyone else will. Mr. Benedict's too modest. He can never bring himself to say it.
He's tried to explain it to any number of people, Rhonda put in, but not only are they skeptical to begin with, Number 2 and I, and a few other assistants, are the only people who have understood him. Mr. Benedict's cheeks and forehead had gone pink with embarrassment. He coughed. As usual, my friends, you overstate my accomplishments. Nevertheless, the essence of what you say is true. Among the authorities these days, it is difficult to find a sympathetic listener.
In other words, compared to you, they're all dummies,
Kate said with a laugh. That is perhaps not the most polite way to put it, Kate, said Mr. Benedict. Unlike Kate, the others were in no mood to laugh. Hidden messages being broadcast to the world, good men and women gone missing, the authorities beyond convincing, and the children were somehow going to be involved in all this. The prospect had caused a deep, indefinable dread to set upon them like a cold mist. Constance's reaction, by now a predictable one, was to express irritation.
Fine, I get it. A lot of people have vanished without a trace, and someone's sending out secret messages, and no one will believe you about it. But we aren't really in danger, are we?
Though her tone was scoffing and irritable, it was evidence from her eyes, which darted back and forth, that Constance was growing afraid.
You said we're all in danger, but that was just an exaggeration, wasn't it?
I'm sorry to say it, Constance, Mr. Benedict said somberly, but I did not exaggerate in the least. You are all in danger, even as we speak. And indeed, even as they spoke, the bell on the landing began a furious clanging.